Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for being here. I'm Matthew Odam from the Austin American Statesman. I'm glad everybody could be here to talk about a really excellent documentary that a lot of y'all are going to get a chance to see tomorrow, and trust me, you'll love it. We Feed People is a documentary about World Central Kitchen, and we're going to bring out the filmmaker, director Ron Howard, producer Sara Bernstein of Imagine Entertainment, and Nate Mook, the CEO of World Central Kitchen. So, nobody gets to see the movie until tomorrow, so we'll try and not do spoilers. I don't know if that's possible with the documentary, but the spoiler is it's a great film, and that World Central Kitchen is a altruistic organization and is doing heroic work. Right now, Nate just got back from Eastern Europe and from Ukraine, where World Central Kitchen is feeding people. They've served over 1 million meals over there already.
Almost 2 now.
2 million. What was that experience like?
I mean, it's still ongoing.
Right.
I mean, a lot of this film covers natural disasters, climate disasters that take place and then are finished, and then we have to sort of pick up the pieces, right? Communities have to kind of rebuild, and World Central Kitchen is in the middle of that. In Ukraine, it's a very different situation because it's still unfolding, right? The disaster is still taking place, and we don't know what's going to happen next, and that is very scary.
Yeah, I mean, how does that even work for you guys? In the documentary, there's scenes of maps, and there's kind of a strategy about how we're going to approach it, and like you say, it's a kinetic thing. It's not a one-off event. So do y'all have any sense right now of what that's going to look like for you guys going forward in the months ahead?
Yeah, I think some of the things that you'll see in the film of how World Central Kitchen responds from the very beginning to as it scales up, a lot of that's very similar. We're an organization, one of the things that Jose says is just adapt constantly. We don't go in with pre-made plans because then things are never going to be the same. Every disaster is different, every emergency, you have to look at the situation in real time. So it's similar. We got on the ground in Poland right after the attacks happened. As Ukrainians started fleeing the country, we started to see what was needed, started to serve meals all along the border in Poland. Then we started to move into Ukraine and then activate restaurants across the country. We're now in 14 cities in Ukraine, and we've set up a base of operations in the city of Lviv where we have multiple warehouses and getting food trucked out to different places. So, but every day we're sort of adapting to what the circumstances are. So it's very similar. We still have maps. They're not public maps because, we don't want to put anybody in danger, but we've got, a real sense of where the needs are, where the food is, and how do we connect those two things together. And it's a continued evolution of the organization and what we do that, Ron has so astutely captured in the film.
And I'm sorry, to production, I think we had a clip of the film. We would love to see that before we talk to Ron further about the film, if we can see that.
I began cooking a stew of beans. Many of the women in the camp were helping me, peeling potatoes, peeling onions. I see a group of the same women were helping me. They had kind of a smile on their face, and they were looking at me, kind of sending me a message that while they appreciate the work I was doing, making meals for them every day, that those beans we were cooking that day is not the way they eat the black beans. Me, to my surprise, I thought, man, I'm making the best beans in the world. After all, I'm José Andrés. I had a TV show in Spain. I have restaurants in America. But I listened to those women with the help of a kind of a big mortar and pestle. At the end, we had this puree of beans that was velvety and silky the way they like it.
In spite of having his ego bruised, he realized that you have to respect people. Food is about community. It's about having food your way and not the way some white savior thinks it should be cooked. And I think that really shaped World Central Kitchen in all of its operations moving forward.
In a way, they were showing me the path of what World Central Kitchen should be doing. To this day, when we go to faraway places, we make sure that what we are feeding is what the locals will love to eat.
You know, that's very a human story, which you're so masterful at telling, Ron. And looking back at your filmography, and I think about what might be a common thread to tie this to another film, I actually thought of Apollo 13 in terms of a group of people under duress trying to pull off something that seems impossible. And so I wonder if you felt any connection to any of your prior films and what drew you to the story.
Well, you know, it was really Jose who I saw at a conference, kind of like this, and it was just a couple of years after Haiti. And so what he was describing about what they had done there and what he was sort of just beginning to launch, which was World Central Kitchen, not even sure it had a name quite yet, but it was remarkable because of his energy, his focus, and the entrepreneurship. And so initially I was just taken by, you know, him, his charisma, his commitment, and also this idea that he was building on something that he knew and understood really well and applying it to a situation. He wasn't trying to do something he didn't know anything about. He was building on, you know, that thing that his whole life was and career was built around. And that intrigued me. So sort of in my mind, I didn't think of it as a film at that point. But, you know, looking back, I was attracted to the character. I bumped into him again somewhere else, and I started seeing things. And Louise Avelis, a longtime colleague at Imagine, she was pointing him out and saying, and we just kept looking at it, talking to our documentary group, and eventually saw him in New York at a fundraiser, and that was many years later. And so World Central Kitchen had really evolved. In fact, I think the whole thing was aligned with UN. The UN was in session and so forth. A lot of people there, you know, politicians and whatnot. And finally, we got our nerve up, and I actually said, do you think we could make a film about what you're doing, Jose? And he said, I don't want a film about me. And I said, well, I'm interested in what you launched, you know. So I think by then I was beginning to think of it, you know, as having heard him talk about it, as this incredible team effort launched by this individual. Again, not saying I'm going to do something I never did before in my life, but instead saying, what can I offer? But building on it step by step, because he's a very ambitious entrepreneurial guy. He applied his spirit, and there you go. So I thought it was an opportunity to sort of demystify the birth of something, of an organization, because that day he turned and we were right next to the World Central Kitchen sort of display, and he said, "See that?" And there were pictures of 20 different key people. You were on that. You were one of those photos, and so was Sam and others. And he said, "It needs to be about them." And I said, "Exactly." So I think by then I was seeing it as an example of something I'm really attracted to: teamwork. How does it work? Sometimes a family becomes a team. Sometimes a group of strangers are forced to become a team. The scripted movie I just finished filming is 13 Lives, which is about the rescue of the kids in Thailand and from the caves. And so without a doubt, you know, I am fascinated by that. The difference, the big difference here is I really didn't know what our story was. Right. I was just really interested in the subject. So to me, what I was going to try to share with people was how it works, what can be done, and sort of demystify it a little bit. We went in and started shooting, and right away discovered, you know, we embedded ourselves and we were following along, that, you know, they're already great. There's not a lot of conflict here. There's a problem that they're solving, right. But it was just smooth functioning machine, you know, a lot of hard work and so forth. But, you know, Nate is a filmmaker. So is Sam Block, who's a part of it. And they have been great about recording this from the beginning. And in that footage, that's where you see the struggle. And that's where you're demystifying it.
Right.
Because you see Jose and everybody bumping into walls, dealing with frustration, disappointment, running up his own credit card. All of these things that you begin to sort of say, oh, here's what it looks like one step after another. And so so you sort of, it's kind of an origin story. Not only him sort of actualizing an aspect of his life through this, but a lot of others as well. And what that can become and how quickly, because you're talking about 12 years. It's pretty remarkable.
I think I see a parallel between an actor who becomes a producer and a director and a celebrity chef who becomes, this missionary of sorts, and a director of this massive organization. Do you see in the footage that you watch of him, which is great, and we'll circle back on that, but the footage you see of him and your job as a filmmaker, as a director, people always say, well, a director has to make 1,000 choices a day. Yeah. And it's just choice after choice after choice, and it's high stress. Did you feel any correlation between the work you've done and what you were seeing?
Very similar, and he talks about it in his interview, that's what chefs do. And I think, I'm not sure if it's you or who says, chefs are good at this kind of thing, coping with chaos, finding a path. So I definitely sort of related to seeing him in action, trying to make decisions and rally everybody. There's a scene in there where he gets, he steps over a line and he's pretty harsh with somebody who's working with him. And actually, just a woman who's there kind of witnessing it calls him on it. And I wasn't sure how he'd feel about that scene being in. It's not something that we shot. It was something from, just coverage from, I think it was the Bahamas. And he said, I'm glad it's in. I'm glad it's in. It's all part of the journey. And I think everybody involved has learned and grown, experienced, and beyond the gratification, I think there are these other lessons that people are taking away from it that are really valuable. The thing that I would say is that, directing a scripted film, you do have, you have a script.
Right.
Here, they have a goal, And on the documentary side, of course, and when I first got into this, the late, great Jonathan Demme, by the way, was on the board of Jacob Burns Film Center, which I like to plug as an organization I'm a part of, and he was as well. When I first said, I think I'm going to try making a documentary, Jonathan, he did both, scripted and documentaries. And he said, you got to go into it with a sense that you know why you're telling the story and what the outcome will be. And then you have to be ready to recognize that none of that is the story you're getting on film, and find it. And, so it's a different kind of process for me as a filmmaker, but I find it rewarding, enlightening, and I also think my scripted work benefits from the experience.
It's a more active form of listening as a filmmaker, right?
Discovering.
Discovering.
And putting pieces together, and even showing footage unformed to people and sort of saying, what are you getting out of this? And trying to build on that. So it's a little more journalistic.
Sarah, you've done some amazing documentaries with Imagine and at HBO. When you first saw or met Jose or got to get a sense of him as this charismatic and really self-aware character, what did you make of him as the centerpiece of a documentary as a producer?
Well, you just said it, right? It's hard to find someone more charismatic, I think, than Jose. So it was pretty clear that Jose would be sort of a centerpiece, and as Ron likes to say, kind of the general of this organization. And I think there's a lot of natural sort of drama. I mean, you see it in the film, the way he interacts with people, the way he guides his team. There's something that really draws people to him, which is why I think he could create, an organization like World Central Kitchen and inspire people like Nate and Ollie and others in our film to join. But I have to say, when Ron was mentioning just the idea of this archive of footage and Nate being a documentary filmmaker, it's funny because I look at this organization, I think there are so many parallels to documentary filmmaking, so it's no surprise to me that the members of his team that you see in our film actually all started as documentary filmmakers trying to cover and document Jose. And then obviously we're so inspired to join World Central Kitchen and to help kind of elevate that mission.
With Nate and Sam, it was they came in to cover the story, right? And to sort of and they wound up getting involved. They put down the cameras and just started helping. And we had the same thing happen with Walter, who's our producer, who's there. And I said, what did you get? And he said, well, we did not too much today because they needed to unload the stuff. and I said, okay, I get it, but you are there to shoot. The other thing was that Jose wanted the film. He understood it. We talked about it. He was very, very respectful and knew it was good for the organization and wanted to get the message out there and all of those things. But he said, but I don't want a lot of cameras around me. And I said, well, there's a little disconnect there between making a film and no cameras. And he didn't really want the microphone because he said, we're busy. We're doing things. And I said, well, look, we're going to do interviews, but we also have to cover you and maybe even from time to time even try to, talk to you and interview you. And he said, I'm not too happy with that. But okay, you can cover me. And so every once in a while, this is about the most I really had to do on this film, is occasionally text Jose and say, please let them put a microphone on you. Please,
Very important.
Please occasionally talk to the producer who's there trying to cover the story.
I thought, going back to Jose as a character, early on you establish, I think, with a shot of him being asked by kind of a condescending journalist who is kind of like, who are you in this organization? And she's just trying to get the story, right? And he doesn't put on any airs and says, I'm just Jose and I don't have a title, and she doesn't know who he is. And I think that kind of sets the tone of the level of selflessness, but also, there's a bit of like almost ironic grandiosity in it. But the fact that he is okay with being behind the scenes, and it seemed like you used that shot early on to kind of anchor that as the ethos of the organization.
I loved that moment. And the other thing that comes to mind, one of my favorite scenes is at the end, where that kid has kind of been deputized or volunteered and been deputized and taken very seriously. Elitist to who needs food. And given a real respect that I know will resonate with him for a long time. And you sort of say, oh, he's that's the gift of giving beyond just, the rescuing you with your hunger with a meal. It's also an example that's being set. And it was one of the important things. We couldn't do it with all of the characters, all the main characters in the film, but to understand Jose's background because of his parents and the way they lived and the choices that they made and the way that inspired him in a very positive way, and other early influences, because this is also a film about sort of on the most human level, the sort of It's a Wonderful Life aspect of committing to help in the way that you can, and that it reverberates. With Jose, it's huge because he's doing something big, but I hope the film demonstrates that it on a person by person level, it's making it possible for a lot of people to make a difference.
And the film's not hagiography, obviously, and it's not. It doesn't get too mired down in biographical detail. We don't 3 minutes in go, when he was a boy. But during the film, you use a couple anecdotes about his parents that are incredibly telling. They drop a ton of truth in a very small amount of space, and then the stuff with his wife and children, and that they're woven in to kind of help flesh out him as a human being. Is it important to do that in a story that's this big, and for tone and for storytelling?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And to be honest, we definitely struggled with, we don't want this to be a hagiography, right? I mean, we don't want to deify him. He is a man, he's human. And I think as, you know, as with all of us, excuse me, where we come from really, you know, informs who we become, I think. And so it was important to really show two sides of him, I think. But also, you know, again, I just always go back to, it was a great gift that Nate and Sam and other members of the team had the foresight to film sort of their evolution, because I think this film would have been something very different if we didn't have this tremendous archive of footage over the past 12 years, right? And maybe, you know, we wouldn't have been able to quite show sort of, you know, how kind of a small group of people, certainly Jose as the leader, but as a small group of people can really become such a big organization and really grow into a global phenomenon. So it's interesting because it goes back to what you asked in the beginning. I think you need someone like Jose in any film, really, right? You need someone, especially a documentary, a subject you're drawn to. But I think the goal was always, from the beginning of this project, was for it to be so much more about so much more than just Jose.
I mean, this as a character, I mean, when he's chomping on the cigar in the early scene, just nonchalantly, and you couldn't write that into a screenplay any better. And so Nate, you were a filmmaker, as we've mentioned, and you came to WCK in what capacity? And you obviously understood that this organization telling the story of the mission is almost half of the mission.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I've known Jose for, 12, 13 years now, and but I've been sort of following and supportive of the work as it's evolved and documenting some of that along the way. And then in 2017, I'd finished a documentary with HBO about Baltimore called Baltimore Rising. And we had just wrapped and premiered the documentary, and Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico. And Jose's assistant reached out because he knew I had done a lot of traveling around the world and said, do you know where Jose can get a satellite phone? Without really any context to that, but I sort of knew he was going somewhere where you would need a satellite phone, so he was probably headed down to Puerto Rico. So I called Jose and he said, yeah, I'm gonna leave in the morning, one of the first flights down there. I said, okay, great, and I jumped on the plane and he and I went down, but I carried my camera with me. I thought, okay, I'm just gonna go and help out a little bit and I can capture some of this and just, I just finished this other documentary, I'll just see what's going on and help tell the story. And as we got down there, we landed in Puerto Rico, he handed me his cell phone and he said, just take my social media, like whatever, like you can just share what we see. And it was, I think in the first couple of days, it was almost accidental. We were just like, okay, well, we'll just put it out into the world and let people into what's going on because this huge hurricane had just devastated this island. What we found very quickly was we became this conduit of information to what was happening on the ground. We were the only source of information in certain places. And we started getting requests in like, oh, can you check on this hospital or check on my grandparents or do this and do that because people were seeing what we were doing. So all of a sudden we became the source of information and truth for what was happening on the ground in these communities, and also creating an ability for people who were on the outside to say, how can I help and get involved? And this isn't unique to Puerto Rico. We're seeing this now in Ukraine, right, where people want to do something, but what do you do? But then if you see an organization or a group of people, or you see the people on the ground, in the case of Puerto Rico, it was Puerto Ricans feeding Puerto Ricans. In the case of Ukraine, it's Ukrainians feeding Ukrainians. Oh, here's something I can get involved in and I can feel like I'm part of it, right? And so we started something that we just sort of couldn't stop, of this, like we've become, I tell my team who are on the front line, in some ways, you're not only feeding people, but you are going to be part storyteller as well. You have to be there because it's our responsibility to give a voice or to give a platform and to amplify the voices of the people that are there, that are going through this trauma, this disaster, whatever it is, this crisis moment, because people need to know. And so we've, my background in storytelling and documentary filmmaking was sort of a natural, I guess a natural way into that, where we just started these dispatches from the field where it was Jose to camera, and then we started posting photos and updates, and now it's just become integral into what we do, alongside the meals that go out. But I think what also, to Sarah's point as well, that I think just was sort of this natural fit was, as Ron said, when I couldn't hold the camera anymore because there was too much work to do, we had taken over this arena in San Juan in 2017, and we were producing 75,000 meals out of this arena, and it was the biggest kitchen it's the biggest restaurant in the world at that point. And I'd say that because people would line up in the morning, we didn't open until 9 a.m., and people would line up in the morning at 4 a.m. just to make sure they could get a meal and place their order, and then we'd give them the food which they would take back to their communities. And we needed somebody to run it, and so I just put my camera down and started running it. But in many ways, it's not too different from producing a documentary, right? It's whether you're producing a film or you've got this team of people doing different things. You have to keep track of the finances and the budget and what you're spending your money on, and you need to kind of create this system. And so I went from producing a documentary to producing a nonprofit.
Right. I mean, and at one point you say, I just spent $70,000 on fruit in a day.
Which at the time was pretty insane, and now that seems like, oh, that's it?
Right.
Like, I just drove down to Odessa in Ukraine, and with about $100,000 in cash, and
But that was pretty comfortable.
Yeah, and to give cash to our restaurant partners down there so they could buy food and supplies for all of the people that they're feeding down in Odessa. And so, yeah, there's a lot of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost, it's part funding arm for people to be able to see the content. Does it become frustrating at any point, in Puerto Rico, many other places, to see the failure of government and NGOs when you can be so nimble? And obviously there's kind of institutional rigor mortis that sets into these things, and it's like trying to turn a ship, but you guys are a speedboat. How does that affect you?
I think in the early days, I think it affected me a lot more, it affected us a lot more, and I think there's a moment that's captured in the film that I won't reveal too much because you guys should watch the movie, where Jose is talking to the American Red Cross. And there's a moment
That's what I was thinking of when I asked you.
Something happens and it kind of breaks something inside of Jose, right? Jose had idolized the American Red Cross, and his first apartment in Washington, D.C. was across the street from Clara Barton's missing soldiers office. And, this is the American Red Cross. And they do something, they say something, and it's sort of like, it's like it's like when you find out there's no Santa Claus, right? It like shatters his, belief system. And so, those early days were sort of shocking, because you realize the things that you thought the way things should work were not how they were working, and nobody really knows what they're doing, and there's no adults in the room, and you can get really frustrated with that, and the bureaucracy of the federal government, and you have the president throwing paper towels and stuff, and that's terrible. At the same time, I think over time, what we've learned and what we've realized as well is that it's not the fault of necessarily any individuals, right? It's that the system itself is not designed for the challenges that we face today. And with climate change, we're facing things we've never had to face before at a scale and frequency we've never had to face them. Here in Texas, you had 2 freezes over the past couple of years, right?
You guys were here.
We were here, yeah. I mean, that, the system doesn't know how to respond to that because it's never happened before. And so, what ends up happening is that you think there are these people are going to ride in and save the day, and nobody does, and it's left up to the communities to fend for themselves. So what an organization like World Central Kitchen does is goes in and works with that community and provides that support and that structure to kind of help them respond on their own. And I think over time, I've become less frustrated with and upset and angry about why do we have to do this? Where's the federal government? And more, well, let's just figure out what we need to do to fix that. What are some of the systemic things that we can begin to address to solve this? So, acknowledging that, yeah, it is broken now, but instead of getting upset about it, how do we direct that energy to actually fixing it? And we touch on that in the film a little bit too, about sort of where the future is headed and how do we go from just feeding people, which is important, to fixing the system so we don't have to feed people anymore.
Ram, when you approach this film and you look at all the footage that they have, the film does a really good job of not being emotionally manipulative when it could be. There's a stirring but subtle musical score. It's kind of haunting. So there's some kind of terrorizing elements. And then it has big personality and a few, light comedic moments. Right. As a filmmaker, do you approach thinking about what's the tone, what's the through line, what's the sentence I keep in my head about what we're trying to tell?
Well, yeah, it's again, it's much more a process of discovery, and and it sort of begins in conversation and reading and beginning to follow them on social and kind of see what the tone of what's that suggesting, but also one of the first sort of buckets of footage that we started to see cut together was actually it's North Carolina where the truck tips over, right? Well, it was fantastic. I mean, it was like it was so well done. I wish I could stage a scene.
Yeah, it's like a war scene.
And it was there for us, and it suggested so many things about the unpredictability of the mission, the element of risk, the sense of community, because the Cajun Navy came and rescued them, and it's sort of all there. And so we began looking for these incidents, these events, and then it became a process of trying to build that together. Like, why don't you ask Jose a few of these questions? We'll save that, when we do the interviews with X, Y, or Z, Nate, and so forth, and just trying to see which events and crises seem to suggest for audiences so it's like you're building sequences. It's like here are the barriers to success. Here are the problems. And so in a lot of ways, my experience in narrative filmmaking, benefits, because I start looking at it and sort of saying, okay, well that's a climax, that's a moment. What do we need to understand that moment? What do we need to have seen? Do we have that footage? Do we need to ask questions? Can we find it? Can we find it in still photographs and make it a voiceover? What can we do? And so it becomes this fantastic post-production sort of challenge, unlike something like the Beatles 8 Days a Week, where you really know the story, and it's really about what can we learn that's new, perhaps in our interviews. What context can we give, and sort of share it. So it's much more a process of discovery, similar to Rebuilding Paradise, another documentary that we made for Nat Geo. And by the way, Nat Geo has been just a fantastic partner. In both of these films, there was no outline, there was no script. It was just, we want to cover this.
Notes?
They let us. Notes. I mean, they're good observers. They've made a lot of documentaries, right. but not trying to guide us in any particular way. I will say, Nat Geo is very, very conscious of climate change, and I think that when the storytelling can reflect that, and certainly both of those films do, because as you were saying, the incidence of these events is it's just intensifying, and it's changing our lives.
You've produced dozens of documentaries, but just recently, in the past couple of years now, you've directed 3 documentaries in just the last couple of years. Are you reinvigorated with this kind of new approach to storytelling?
Well, Sarah's produced dozens of documentaries.
Well, your name's on a, your company's produced a bunch of them.
Very busy at a massive documentary.
I'm loving it. I've always had I've always loved documentaries. For years, I wouldn't do scripted movies based on real events because I thought it would limit my creativity. But after Apollo 13, in 94, 95, I realized, in fact, the power of building upon and revealing the details of true events, what it can mean to an audience, but I still didn't have the courage to sort of tackle documentaries. Brian Grazer took on a couple, really enjoyed it. This opportunity came to me to just cover this Jay-Z music festival, and I didn't have very much time to talk myself out of it. And Brian Grazer brought it to me, and I had this conversation with Jonathan Demme, and he just said, "Take the leap. You're going to love it, man. You're going to be able to use more of what you know about filmmaking than you think you'll be able to use." And so I'm forever appreciative of that because I found I was able to put more of myself into the film even than I expected. And so I wouldn't say it's reinvigorated me because I've never stopped loving directing. I mean, I'm lucky that way. But I do think it's informing the work, the way I do it, the way I prepare, my openness on the day to what we might be able to discover, and then post, because documentaries are so much about post, and it really is amazing how when you don't have the scene you that could be staged, but you have the information or the idea that you want to convey, sort of how you find the way to communicate that to the audience. And in many ways, it's often more creative and interesting and a little more subtle than if you just, if you shot the scene to express this thing. Right. So I feel like, again, I'm growing. I feel like I'm growing still as a filmmaker, and I'm grateful for that.
What's it like working with the new guy on the block?
Well, I was just going to say, what is selfishly, I think. Sorry, I keep doing that. For myself and Justin Wilkes, who's my partner in the division, and our whole team, Meredith Kalfers is out here, one of our producers on the film. I think what is so wonderful about Ron's excitement, interest, and real passion for documentaries is that he is, progressively, I think certainly since we launched the division, he's taking on subjects that I'm not sure he would have really thought about before we actually had an infrastructure for him, and and people like Justin, myself, and our team who had kind of more specific experience, particularly even with issue films, right? I mean, we have probably almost 30 projects at Imagine Documentaries at the moment between feature docs and series. But what's exciting is that our hope is there will always be at least one Ron-directed doc a year, and I think it's interesting because he's kind of oscillating between big personalities like Pavarotti. Mm-hmm. He has a new one that we will be announcing very soon, which is another incredible personality story for Ron to explore, with really kind of serious issue-driven projects like We Feed People and like Rebuilding Paradise. And I think the difference, and myself having worked on a lot of these projects over the years, and certainly we're in, as everyone's saying, like a great golden age of documentary programming. There's lots of attention being paid to documentaries and networks like Nat Geo who are really supporting it. But there's something very specific about having a director like Ron Howard go to Paradise, California, and pay attention to that subject matter. And the town opened up in a way that was, really different and special, and I observed it firsthand. And I think there's also a level of attention and elevation to a subject like World Central Kitchen and what they are doing to really change food relief around the world, that Ron as a director, of his talent, of his stature, of his experience, paying attention to, that probably will bring a little more attention to the subject than maybe if another documentary filmmaker was doing it. And I love all documentary filmmakers, so I don't mean to say it in a negative way. I just mean it's important for Ron to take on these subjects, and I'm so grateful that you're doing it. And I think you're really sort of enjoying it.
I really am. The other thing that I would just say is that I love the collaborations with the full-time documentarians. This is a great group of people. They're adventuresome, they're curious, they're intelligent, they're creatively ambitious, you know, and they are providing a service. They're there to serve. They want to discover and share, so I find them fun, cool, smart, and inspiring to work with.
Working on some of this issue-oriented material, have you felt activated as a citizen in making this film? I mean, as you watch it, I'm ready to just quit my job and, you know, email my resume. Like, do you feel like you want to be part of the conversation and fight?
I feel humbled by it. I really do, because I don't know that it's in my nature to be that giving and be that committed. But this is the thing I can do, and the thing that I'm willing to do, and my family will support. So my heart and my hat goes off and my heart goes out to somebody like Nate, Jose, who, you know, just make that extra, more than extra, this incredible leap to make a difference. A commitment of years is, you know, it's beyond inspiring. It's humbling.
Nate, you said, well, Jose said in the documentary, and I don't want you to speak for him, but speak for him. He says we don't only feed people, we make systems. So can you talk about that part of really what the mission is?
Yeah, you know, one of the things that we learned in Puerto Rico, which, you know, again, I think to Ron's point, what's so wonderful about the film and what they were able to create out of all of this footage that we had shot previously and some of the new footage is you see the growth and the evolution, the development of the organization, but even beyond that, not just the organization, but the model, the way that we do things, and why it's different, perhaps, than what's been done before. And one of the things that came out of Puerto Rico was after we finished Puerto Rico, you know, people said, well, yeah, Jose, you did this great thing, and that's great, but everybody was still skeptical because he's just a chef, and what is a chef doing, you know, down in a disaster zone? And Puerto Rico was this unique thing, and it's, you know, it's its own. And then we found ourselves a month later out in Southern California when these big wildfires hit. This was a year before the Paradise Fire in 2017. And we essentially took the same approach that we did in Puerto Rico and applied it to a very different scenario, but it was the same model. It was the same way of doing things. And then we went to Guatemala for a volcano eruption, and we took the same model down there. And all of a sudden we started to see, wait a minute, I think we're kind of onto something here. We've got something that plays a really critical role. And we're learning and building it in the process, right? We didn't have it all figured out. We still don't have it all figured out. We're in a war zone right now, right? So it's you're kind of building it and it's growing and evolving over time. And one of the things that came out of that was it's, you know, in some ways, I don't want to downplay it, but the cooking is the easy part, right? Making the food is actually the easiest part of the whole thing. But how do you identify where the food needs to go? How do you make sure you can get the food there? How do you make sure you can get the food there so when it's still hot? How do you make sure that that the food you're making is culturally relevant and appropriate to the community that you're in? How do you make sure the community is part of what you're doing? And so the most important thing I think that we do at the end of the day is we build the system, and food just happens to be the thing that we may be distributing. And in a situation like the Bahamas, which you'll see in the film with Hurricane Dorian, which was the biggest storm ever to hit in the Atlantic, we found ourselves delivering medicines and evacuating people out of the islands, putting people on our helicopters. We drop off meals and then we put people in the helicopter and fly them back. We were distributing, chainsaws to help people kind of clear debris, and we were. And so, once you have that distribution system set up, you can kind of do anything with it. And I think that's, one of the things that Jose was talking about there, is that it's the feeding people piece is sort of one component of that, and is being of service to the people, and obviously the main thing that we do. But it's not just about the meal itself. It's all of the other things around it that really enable the work.
chef was down here, as we said, in February of last year during the freeze, and we were talking, and he said, you've got schools everywhere with empty kitchens, and there's no kids in them. Like, why isn't the city cooking? Why aren't they producing food? Like, what's going on? And he has pretty simple ideas that can have a big change or a big effect. Is the hope that WCK can provide some kind of a template for government?
It's something that we're actively working on. There are a lot of those things that when you see them in the moment, you sort of wonder why aren't things done this way? In many ways, while Puerto Rico was this transformative moment to the organization, as Ron said, the organization was founded in 2010 after the earthquake in Haiti, but a lot of those early years were learning, were growing. It was Jose figuring out how to use his expertise and experience and background to bring this new approach. But a few weeks before Puerto Rico, before Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico, Hurricane Harvey hit Houston. And Jose went down to Houston and went to the convention center that was housing 12,000 people. And there were all these kitchens in this convention center, like this convention center here, right? It's set up it can feed a lot of people. And they were sitting dormant. And Jose was like, you have all of these people here, you have all these kitchens, we need to get food to people that are here, they're hungry, let's just activate these kitchens and use them. And there was this internal bureaucracy within the convention center, and that was a moment that in many ways was a precursor to Puerto Rico, because it was this moment where he was like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, we have to fix this. And if any, I think in some ways what makes Jose so effective at what he does is that he's almost too naive to know that that's not the way that things work. So he's just like, no, like, this doesn't make any sense. Of course we're gonna do it. He doesn't care about the bureaucracy, the contracts, the thing. Oh, we can't open that kitchen because there's a legal contract with this, and this catering company has it, and that, or this school, they've got an agreement here, and you gotta get permissions, and there's legal. He doesn't even think about all that. He's just like, this doesn't make any sense, let's do it. And then he just pushes it forward. So it is something, this is, I think, one of the next big pieces of our work. If there is an epilogue to the film, perhaps it is going to be how, Jose, talking to senators and in Congress and introducing legislation and working on some of these things, because this is what we need to do. We need to learn that in response to the growing number of disasters and emergencies we have, and COVID was one of them, right? I mean, COVID was a big one. One of the things we learned in COVID was when schools shut down, schools don't just educate our children, but also feed our children. So all of a sudden you had families going hungry because the schools that normally feed them did not exist, and yet we did not activate those schools in many cases. In some cities they did a little bit of this.
We did some of that here.
We did some of that, exactly, to feed people, right? And so I think that is a big next piece of this. How can we look at the resources we have as a country and come up with better systems, better approaches, and hopefully, create more effective responses, so in the end, organizations like World Central Kitchen don't necessarily have to keep doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. At one point, somebody said when there's a medical crisis, you bring in a doctor. So there's a food crisis, you bring in people that know food. There's an organization called Good Work Austin here in Austin that
we work closely
that
with.
y'all worked with. Yeah, that was activated during coronavirus. Yeah. So we do need experts in those areas to teach the government how to do actual things besides just be the government.
Well, that's what I was just going to say, is that to me the other thing that I began to see in the film was this kind of sort of lesson, a kind of a case study in creating pilot programs. And basically, again, it's really about individuals take action and they create an example, right? And if it's a good example and it's constructive, then that's something that other people can observe, say, oh, I didn't think about that, or I didn't have the guts to try that, but hey, we'll do it, it works. And that is something that we as citizens of the world and our countries and towns and whatnot, we can experiment in. And you can launch a better way, right. And not wait for government to do a study and a thing and blah, 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 and which they shouldn't stop doing and trying. But maybe they'll be informed by some really creative thinking, because somebody who really understands their world, whatever that is, and how to make something work better, exercises that and improves it.
I mean, worst case scenario is it's status quo if it doesn't work.
Right.
So I'm interested as filmmakers, speaking of an epilogue to the film, you know, the film seems to be kind of winding down, and then there's like, oh, COVID. And it just, I wonder how that came to you guys as filmmakers, how close you were to kind of wrapping it, and how are we going to add this in? And not only that, it's kind of the prequel to a sequel, and like, you know, oh, the call's coming from inside the house. Like, this is the real
Well, unfortunately,
alarm.
we weren't close to wrapping it. We were really just kind of getting started.
Oh, that's good.
So again, thank God for all this fantastic footage, because we could see that the period of time that we were financed to really cover this was going to be very much focused on COVID, which is, you know, wasn't entirely the case, but it was, you know, it was largely the case. You know, we were also covering the possibility that some kind of policy move was going to be made, or maybe that there'd be an appointment of some sort. And so we were ready for that, but the amount of time where the Nat Geo was supporting us, kind of the clock ran out. But I think it is about an idea growing into an organization, and I don't know if there's another film in it or not, but there's certainly more to the story. And it will be very interesting to see, from a policy standpoint, what kind of impact World Central Kitchen or others who might emulate World Central Kitchen or rally together with World Central Kitchen, what kind of impact can they make on not only relief efforts, but hunger in general, which I think is very much on Jose and all your minds now, right?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the end of the film, it's, you guys have been a relief organization, but the broader point is food insecurity is the crisis of our time, in addition to climate change. And so climate change covers the basis of relief work, but then you kind of shine this light on, well, food insecurity at large is the problem of our time. So does that then become kind of the broader goal?
Yeah, you know, we believe in something, we talk about this a lot, that food is a universally human right? That nobody should go hungry. There is enough food in this world to feed everyone, just not allocated properly. And that really is at the core of why we do what we do and why Jose does what he does. And so, yes, feeding people in the emergency in that moment, they need to be fed now, not next week, next month. But at the same time, how do you look at those underlying structures and systems, as we said before? And, you know, we're making some progress. Just this week, we were able to get in the big omnibus, which is the big budget that Congress passes, funding and requirement that the White House host a conference on food, nutrition, hunger, and health. I know it's like more conferences, we don't need more conferences, but actually, this is actually really important, because the last time this happened was in 1969 under Richard Nixon. It was the last time the US government held sort of a national summit on food policy. And out of that in 1969 came the school breakfast program, food stamps, what's now SNAP. A lot of the current policies that exist today date back to 1969, and many of them haven't changed very much, right? Which is kind of ludicrous when you think about it. So the idea here is we need to put food front and center. Food is connected to everything in our country. It's connected to our health. It's connected to the environment. It's certainly connected to climate change. It's connected to, you know, labor. I mean, and immigration. I mean, it touches so many things, yet we don't prioritize it in that way. And so that's one of the things that Jose has been very vocal on, and using this platform to push for. And we see some of this in the film. Jose likes to say that food is a national security issue. And it's not, you know, it's not just sort of a nice soundbite, but it actually is true. I mean, looking at Ukraine right now, there's big fear of global food shortages because so much food comes from the eastern part of Ukraine. And now they're going to miss a growing season. They can't export anything. The World Food Program is estimating that there are going to be huge shortages of food across Africa. I mean, this is a real problem, and lack of food leads to instability and conflict. That leads to migration. That leads to people leaving their homes. We see it firsthand. I was down in the border last year in Texas, in McAllen, Texas, and we met a family there who had come across the border. There was a huge surge of folks that were asylum seekers that were fleeing into the United States, and they had set up in a park. They had set up a tent. They had sort of a tent city set up in McAllen, Texas, and because there were so many people, they couldn't hold them. And we met a family that we were providing meals. The WCK team went down, and we were serving hot meals. And this family came up to us, and they said, "Wow, World Central Kitchen, like, you guys are great. You guys actually fed us the previous October after Hurricane Eta and Iota hit our town in Honduras. Wow. And we lost our farm and our home, and like we had nothing left, and we couldn't grow any food anymore, and so we had to leave. And we walked up here, and we came across the border." And you see that direct correlation, right? I mean, it's kind of a crazy story, but it's like you see that direct impact of what's happening in this world leading to what we're facing, these emergencies that we're facing right now. And so, you know, there's a lot of work to be done. These are not easy issues to solve, both politically and otherwise. You know, we spend $6 billion a year housing people on our southern border. So Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, California, $6 billion a year housing people. We spend $3 billion a year supporting the World Food Program, right? So you think about like allocation of resources. So, you know, these are some of the things that we're starting to really think about and tackle, and it's slow moving. So, you know, it's going to be tough. Jose is going to have some patience, you know, and if you watch the film, it doesn't always.
Not his greatest virtue.
Maybe not. But it is, you know, it is something that we're starting to plant the seeds, and we hope that it can, you know, that we can make a difference.
You guys talk about in the film empowering communities. How do you do that?
That's a great point, actually, because we talked a lot about relief, right, and like the emergency response. But a big part of our work is not leaving. That we don't just, like, when we're done, we don't just like pack up and just say, all right, guys, you're on your own. If communities need additional support, we look at how we can support for the longer term. Not us being there doing, but how can we uplift some of those communities? Puerto Rico is a great example. You know, why was Puerto Rico so food insecure after Hurricane Maria hit? Well, because it was importing 85% of its food. That's not very sustainable. It didn't used to be that way, but things have changed over the decades. And so we said, all right, well, how can we get more local food production in Puerto Rico? And we looked at some of the gaps, and one of them was small farmers. They can't get loans, they can't get support. And we said, all right, let's allocate X amount of dollars, put a grant program in place. Over the last 4 years, we've had, I think, close to 300 grantees on the island. We've got farmers and fishers and different food producers there. That program is now spread to Guatemala and U.S. Virgin Islands and the Bahamas and places that we've been in our relief efforts that now we're continuing to support for the longer term. So looking at ways that we can really, you know, not sort of be there to provide meals, but rather how do we help the food systems become more resilient? And we're looking here after COVID in the United States as well, right? How can we support those small farmers that really are the backbone of this country? How can we support, you know, especially like Black and minority-owned farms? We've been doing that. We're talking to a lot of folks here in Texas about that as well. You know, we look at sourcing. Where do we buy from? How do we make sure the dollars are going back into the communities? And really thinking about that as, you know, as ways that we can move forward. One of the things that Jose has been talking about a lot is, as we look at food insecurity overall, is you look at SNAP, the SNAP program, SNAP dollars, right? Very important for a lot of families, unfortunately, because we don't have a livable wage in a lot of places, so people are reliant. But where do they spend that money, right? They're often not spending it back in their local communities. They're driving to the community over there and using it at the Walmart or something, right? And that money doesn't flow back into the communities. So we have to start really thinking about that overall. So lots to talk about for another time.
Another session. We got about 30 seconds left. The title of the film, We Feed People, so great, such an understatement of the year. Who came up with the title?
Oh, I don't really remember.
We collectively.
Yeah, we just.
Yeah, I mean, we were lucky because it's actually something that comes out of Jose's
That's right.
mouth
He
at the
says.
beginning of the film, and it just perfectly
It
summed
jumped
up.
out at us. And this whole principle that one plate at a time you can change
Yeah.
things. You know that's the
Yeah.
kind of that's a connection with dignity, power, and you know, and the future of tomorrow in it. The potential. So, but yeah, once we all landed on it, it was like
Done.
quickly we were done. We had to type.
Brilliant. Well, the film premieres tomorrow at the Paramount. It'll later be, I think, in May on Disney Plus.
Plus.
May 27th.
May 27th.
So everybody, if you can't make it down tomorrow, Disney Plus in May, but go tomorrow, see it on the big screen, hear the music, see the shots. Great piece of work. Let's thank everybody up here.
Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it.